There's a certain kind of person who can sit in a room full of people, phone in hand, completely absorbed in someone else's story, and feel, for just a moment, like they're living it too. Not because their own life is empty. Not because they're lazy or lost. But because something about watching feels easier than doing. Safer than starting. More comfortable than the unpredictable mess of actually being in the middle of your own story. Most people around them won't understand it. They'll call it distraction. Avoidance. Sometimes they'll say it with a little edge. Why are you always watching other people's lives? As if the person doing it hasn't already asked themselves the same question. Quietly, late at night. What gets missed in that judgment is everything underneath it. This isn't about laziness. It isn't about envy, not really. And it's almost never about not wanting a life. It's something much more specific, much more human, and far more common than anyone admits out loud. The psychology of people who watch others' lives instead of fully living their own is one of the most misunderstood patterns in modern human behavior, and the explanation has almost nothing to do with social media. Researchers studying what's called parasocial engagement, the psychological bond people form with the lives of others, whether that's a YouTuber, a celebrity, or even a neighbor, found something that surprised them. The people most drawn to observing others' lives didn't score higher on measures of passivity or low ambition. They scored higher on sensitivity, empathy, and what psychologists call emotional imaginative processing. In plain terms, they feel things deeply, and watching someone else's life gives them a way to do that at a controlled distance. There's also neuroscience worth knowing here. Mirror neurons, the part of the brain that activates both when you do something and when you watch someone else do it, fire in remarkably similar patterns in both cases. Your brain, in a very real biological sense, partially experiences what it watches. For someone whose inner world is rich and intense, observation isn't passive. It's its own form of living. The brain doesn't fully separate the two. But why does the pull toward watching become stronger than the pull toward doing? For some people, that's where it gets deeper. For many people who develop this pattern, there's something in the past that made their own life feel like uncertain ground. Not necessarily trauma in the dramatic sense. Sometimes it's subtler than that. A childhood where their choices were frequently criticized. An environment where stepping forward meant getting it wrong in front of people who mattered. Or simply, repeated experiences of trying and it not going the way they hoped. Enough times that the nervous system quietly started logging the message. Being visible in your own life comes with a cost. Watching, by contrast, is safe. There's no exposure. No failure. No one can critique your performance when you're the audience. The nervous system, which is always prioritizing protection, learns that observation is where you get the emotional experience without the emotional risk. This isn't a choice people make consciously. It's an adaptation. The body and mind found a way to still feel alive, still feel connected to possibility, still experience joy and longing and excitement, without ever having to step into the arena where those things could be taken away. That is not weakness. That is intelligence operating under constraint. And here's something worth sitting with. This pattern doesn't belong to one type of person. It shows up in quiet introverts and socially confident people alike. It shows up in high achievers in one area of life who go completely passive in another. It shows up in people who are fully, genuinely living in some dimensions, but in one particular corner of their life, the one that matters most, they're watching instead of moving. Different nervous systems, different histories, different corners. No version is more broken than another. Now, the part most conversations about this skip entirely. There's a paradox inside this pattern that almost no one names directly. The very act of watching other people's lives is often driven by a deep, genuine hunger for your own. You're not watching because you don't want things. You're watching precisely because you do. The desire is real. The vision is real. Something along the way convinced you that the gap between where you are and what you want is too exposed, too risky to walk across out in the open. So the watching becomes both the consolation and the evidence. Evidence that you still care. Evidence that the wanting didn't die. The quiet cost, though, is this. The more you live in observation mode, the more your own life starts to feel like it's happening somewhere just out of reach. Close enough to see, far enough to feel unreal. Not because it isn't available to you, but because the habit of distance becomes its own kind of home. And homes, even uncomfortable ones, are hard to leave. There's nothing wrong with you for having built that home. Truly. You built it because at some point, you needed it. The mind doesn't create patterns for no reason. Every adaptation has a story behind it, and yours makes sense. Completely, psychologically, developmentally. What it means is simply this. Somewhere inside you, there is a life you've been watching from the outside. A version of yourself you've studied, imagined, and rehearsed in your mind, perhaps for years. And the distance between you and that version is not made of inadequacy. It's made of learned protection, of old calculations your nervous system ran before you were even aware of it. That's not a permanent condition. It's a pattern. And patterns, once understood, really understood, not just intellectually but felt, begin to loosen at the edges. You're not behind. You haven't missed your life. The fact that you still feel the pull toward it, that you still watch with that particular kind of longing, means the wanting is intact. That part of you never left. If something in this felt quietly familiar, there's likely more beneath it worth exploring. The way you relate to your own story runs deeper than this one pattern, and understanding it has a way of changing things you didn't even know were connected.